All right, and we are now live. So I'm excited to be doing this video. I've got two great people here that can help us guide through this conversation of really the role of an associate. So, and how do you do leadership development, and how do you stay sharp when you're not the senior pastor, when you're the associate pastor, and especially in the role we're going to talk about today with children and family ministries. Outside of really any other ministry, this is where the most of your volunteers are going to be plugged in, is where most of your resources are going to be flowing. And so how do you do children's ministry and family ministry well? So I have Emily Kerr and and Christy here. And so what I want to do just real briefly is tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your journey. I'd love to also hear a little bit about your current church and where you're serving. So Emily, you're on the screen up here with me, and so I'm going to start with you. So I know you've transitioned into this new role from a previous role. So tell me a little bit about your ministry journey.
Yeah, so when I graduated from Texas A&M, I was offered a residency at Grace Bible Church, which was a big blessing. I had volunteered in that church all throughout college and just figured that I would go have to find something else, and they called me in and said, hey, we see that you're gifted in ministry, and so we would love for you to go to seminary, and if you'll work for us, we'll let you do that as you're working. And so it was really good blessing to be able to do that right after college. I was their children's coordinator is what they called me, and I worked there for 5 years. It was a great experience because it was with college students mainly was the focus of that church. We were right by Texas A&M, but we had a lot of families there too, and so getting to use all of those college students as volunteers was really cool to see those young people be passionate about our children. And then 5 years later, I got married to my husband, Travis, and he lives out in Alabama, Huntsville, Alabama. So I moved out here without a job, didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew that I wanted to be with my husband. And a month later, found a job online at First Baptist Church of Madison. They were looking for a part-time children's associate at the time. And so I just thought, I want full-time, but let's check it out and see what it's like.
Yeah.
And they were great church, great people, very welcoming, and the congregation was just so welcoming. So I said yes after they offered me the job, and it quickly turned from part-time to almost full-time, which is a great blessing. So that's where I'm at right now, and I'm their minister of children now. They've changed my title, working with the kids.
Awesome. And about how big is the church, and how many kids and volunteers do you have there?
So Grace Bible Church, the one I came from, was, about 1,000. It's multi-campus church, but the one I'm at now is 300. So it's a lot different from what I was in. But the children's ministry is still fairly big. We have about 60 elementary students, plus preschool.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Emily. Well, and Christy, again, tell me a little bit about your journey and how you've ended up where you're currently at.
Okay, my journey started about probably 18 years ago. My kids, when my youngest daughter ended up starting kindergarten, I started working part-time, the title was an elementary coordinator at a church in Frisco, and that was a part-time role. Well, it was part-time on paper, but
I was going to say that there are no part-time ministries.
Part-time, yeah. So part-time role, and I actually ended up in that position that kind of morphed into ultimately a full-time, was elementary the whole time, but I was there on staff for almost 15 years. And in the last year, so at the beginning of last year, I finished DTS last summer. Well, at the beginning of last year, as I was approaching graduating DTS, God really was tugging on my heart and made it very clear to me that he was about to do something different for me, and that I was about to do something different, which I was really questioning him, like, are you sure you want to move me? Because I'm pretty happy where I'm at. So, I don't know that I want to go do something else. And but I came to Fellowship Bible Church in Dallas, and became the children's pastor. So now I am responsible for everything from birth through 5th grade, and to have the parenting ministry under me. And it's been really neat to see how God has guided my journey, and how, despite my hesitancy to do it, he always proves himself very faithful. And so it's been a really, really neat move. So Fellowship is about just under 1,000 people probably. And then from birth to 5th grade, we have somewhere around 200. In the summer, it's a little lower. Gets a little higher, somewhere between 220 on the kids ministry. So
okay. And I'm thinking about this for both your positions. So I'm assuming, is there also a youth minister, and how does that work? Because you're responsible up to 5th grade for you, Christy, and Emily, kind of the same thing up to 5th, 6th grade.
Right.
Okay.
Up to 5th grade.
And then, so I guess the question is the interaction between the youth ministry and the children's ministry. Is there coordination when it comes to curriculum, coordination as thinking about scope and sequence? I'm just curious how that works at either church.
For us, there's not.
This one's off script. I'm just.
Okay. For us, there's not really coordination in curriculum. We do. So our 4th and 5th graders are our preteen ministry, which I am responsible for. So we do try to coordinate, like when we transition 5th graders, like we're coming up on Promotion Sunday, trying to coordinate a time where the student ministries can come to, and we mix them together so the kids kind of get a foretaste of what they're going to. We have a lot of conversations about things that we can do, but we're not combined in the sense of ongoing curriculum stuff.
Okay.
And ours is about the same. We don't have the same curriculum as our youth group, but the youth minister there is a good friend of mine. So, of course, we have conversations about, what we're doing in children's, what he's doing. And we have the same thing where we let our youth try out the youth group one Sunday before they actually move up.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I mean, it is a little bit autonomous in the sense of he's in charge of youth and I'm in charge of children, and that's really what we're focusing on.
Okay. Yeah. No, totally understand that. Totally understand that.
And that was true at the church I was at before too, so I don't think that's uncommon.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it takes a lot of people to run a children's ministry. And I think sometimes we don't realize how many volunteers it takes. And, as we were getting ready to press record, we were talking about, we're making this video during the summer, and there's vacation Bible schools and camps, and, and then if you've got an Awanas, all these various different things. So how do you go about recruiting and then training those new volunteers, and then kind of the flip side of the coin of the ongoing training of the volunteers? What does that look like? So how do you recruit volunteers? How do you train the new volunteers? And how do you do ongoing training with the volunteers that you have?
Well, for us, me being in this position now for 10 months, I'm not an expert yet, but I found in the smaller churches that it's really just the personal, hey, would you pray about serving in children's ministry with me? Whereas at Grace Bible Church, where I didn't know half the congregation, it was a little bit of a bigger pool, so we got to just put up a slide on Sunday morning, hey, we need children's volunteers, and then of course we had them do a application, and then I had a meeting with them and background check and all of that. Whereas at a church of 300, I know most of the people. So it's neat for me to be able to say, like, hey, I think you're gifted in kindergarten, so would you consider doing that this coming year? And I've realized that those personal conversations have been really helpful at this church. Whereas at Grace Bible Church, we would get 100 college students respond to a slide because we had so many college students.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Emily, that even in the bigger churches, because the church I was at was 6,000. So, we had 500 kids just in elementary. And so, but the struggle was the same across the board, no matter, I think, what the church size is always looking for volunteers. And we've done the pulpit announcements, and we've done the bulletin announcements, and we've, done the emails to parents, and all of those things can work to a point. But I think the real ability is, the personal engagement. And it is harder to do in a bigger church. But even like when we get initially people in, still having that one-on-one conversation. So I'll try to meet with, if somebody says, hey, I'm interested, I'll try to meet with them, or I will meet with them one-on-one and have a conversation with them. And I've gotten to where here particularly, I didn't do it as well at the other church, but I will just tell them, this is what I need from you. I need a commitment, instead of trying to make it fluffy and easy. This is what the expectation is, because our ministry is relational, and we need people who are willing to be consistent and committed to doing this. So I'd rather you tell me now before we get started that you can't do this. It's hard though. Recruiting is probably the hardest part, I think, of doing children's ministries.
I think so too. And again, my previous position in church, my wife was a preschool and children's minister. It was, you were always in recruiting season.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I'm just thinking about this, really my most effective recruiting was satisfied volunteers, because the volunteers then recruit, hey, we're having really fun with this. Come join me, those types of things.
Relationship.
Yeah. It's the relationships.
Yeah,
It's the relationships.
definitely.
Well, Emily, you mentioned this. I just want to talk about this, and I want to talk about what does training of new volunteers look like. You mentioned background checks and applications and those types of things. And Christy, you're saying, hey, we're putting the expectations up front. So are there job descriptions? Like, is this a packet people get? So again, if I'm watching this video for the first time, like, what does an application look like, or what does an info packet look like, or is it more just kind of word of mouth?
Right. Well, I learned all of this at Grace because I came into the ministry. They already had it all set up. And then coming to First Baptist Madison, they had zero setup. So you might step into a church where they tell you what to do, which is great. Or you might step into a church where you go, okay, we got to build this from the ground up. And so I think that working at Grace Bible, just learning how important those one-on-one meetings are, really stuck with me, because you can have them fill out an application, which I think is good, so that you can have their written personal testimony for you to read over. But you also want to meet with them and just, honestly listen to the Spirit as you're talking to them and see if this feels like something that would be a good fit. And of course, if you know that person, it's a lot easier. But if you don't know them, it's a really great way for you to figure out if this is a good. Because honestly, when you're talking about safety of children, if somebody is trying to come into a children's ministry to do things that are bad, they're not going to want to meet with you. They're not going to want to sit down and have a conversation. And so it's just another way to background check, in a sense. And then once you meet with them, if you feel like you should proceed, we do the background check, of course. And then we're implementing now at First Baptist Madison our sexual abuse training, just so that they can be aware of what to look for, what not to do, what to do if you do see something that's strange. And so we kind of have 4 steps, I guess, of the application, the interview, the background check, and the training.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the same 4 steps. The interview, it used to be application first, but since I've come in, I've switched it to be the interview first, because we had trouble getting people to fill all the paperwork out when they have no idea what they're coming into.
Right.
Oh, that's very true.
They don't have the information. I'm like, okay, look, I said I want to volunteer, but I don't even know what I'm doing, and you're asking me to spend this much time spending out the stuff. So we do the conversation first, and then we have them do background check. We do Ministry Safe, which is sexual abuse awareness training, and we do an application as well. When I do the interviews, I have a packet, and in that packet, we have a handbook, of Children's Ministries handbook, that has like our ministry philosophy, our truth foundations, the things that we want. We have 5 basic truth foundations we want every kid to walk out of children's ministries understanding about God. So we have that in there. We have all the rules and regulations, like, don't take kids to the bathroom, things like that.
Yeah.
All the safety stuff that goes in there. So we go through that with them. I go through that in that one-on-one, and then I'll go through curriculum, so that if they have an area of interest, I'll show them the curriculum we use for that one. And then we'll go through and walk through, this is what a morning looks like. This is what the curriculum looks like. Ask them about questions. I have them review their testimony with me, kind of their journey to why they want to serve and where they come from, a little bit of background, just so I can kind of get to know them personally. So that's kind of what our packet, it's not something you would necessarily want to just hand to somebody and go, here, review this and see what you think. It's designed to work alongside that interview process.
Yeah, part of the conversation. Makes total sense. Well, so talk to me about training. So let's say I have, I've passed muster. So I've met with you, and you're going to put me to work in kindergarten or a children's classroom or something like this. How do you handle training? Do you do special training for the new volunteers, or do they just join in with ongoing training that you're doing with volunteers who are already there? So kind of talk to me about what does training the volunteers look like?
For us, we have I have 3 staff members that work under me that we call volunteer coaches. And they will, so if you're doing kindergarten, then once I go through that process of interview and get all of the paperwork in and you're vetted and all that, we decide, hey, kindergarten's for you, then I'm going to hand you off to that person and they're going to have you shadow the classroom. This is for initial training, but they're going to have you shadow the classroom and then they're going to talk through all of the stuff with you in that regard. So you're kind of watching a classroom work, which is really hands-on training in that way. And then they'll say, okay, now that you've watched this, now I'm going to put you in this room and you're going to mimic that. From an ongoing training standpoint, we do 2 all-volunteer call trainings a year. We do one around September and one in February, where we come in and it just varies what we talk about. Like we might talk about emergency procedures, but I've been trying to really make sure and do something that's developmental for them as well, whether it be how to teach or whether it be their own personal development. One thing about this church, and this may be getting into another question, but we have a church vision that's very clear, and we have strategy areas that we work through those things as a church. So every ministry comes under and looks at what we're doing and says, hey, these are the goals we have and these are the things we want to accomplish. So trying to utilize those things to do some training with our people so that everybody is kind of moving in the same direction along the same path is one of the do so. And we try to make it fun too, have games and prizes and lunch. You always got to feed them because they'll come if you feed them.
So
we do it right after church.
Okay, I was going to say, is it a half day on a Sunday?
We do like an hour and a half right after church. We feed them lunch and then maybe 2 hours, and then that way they're already there. It's not another additional trip they have to make to the church.
Very true.
We have at this church, I'm really, really pleased. We have about 80% of our volunteers that show up to that.
That's really good.
Previous church, we were happy with 40%. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And we do a similar, so we do I usually do 1 training a year with everybody, and that's at the fall, right before we have back to school Sunday. Where we go through just a review of the policies and then our curriculum and whatever other thing we need to talk about at the time. And then, of course, in the beginning stages, when they're a new volunteer, we have that one-on-one interview, which really is a training because I'm asking them questions, but I'm also telling them, here's all of our policies, and, getting them up to speed. So I would say that's kind of a 2-in-1 meeting right there. But then we do have every month a meeting with our Sunday school teachers, and it's just first Sunday of the month right before Sunday school. It's not very long, but it's just a time for me to say, hey, here's something that's really been pressing on my mind that y'all need to know. Whether it's I have a new security system so that you can do a lockdown procedure, or we have this new curriculum thing that's really exciting. So we do that once a month, but then I send out emails every week of here's your lesson, here's what I want you to focus on. And that's a training in a way as well, just on, them being equipped on, okay, these are some options I could do this Sunday instead of just figure it out on your own.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and on the quicker ones, I didn't think about that, but our coaches meet with their volunteers that will be there that Sunday every morning before the service, and they huddle up and they pray together, but then they'll talk through, hey, here's something you need to know about today, or, oh, if this is confusing, anybody got questions about the curriculum, stuff like that.
Yeah. And Christy, how often do you meet with those volunteer coaches?
They're all on staff, so we have a staff meeting once a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, so let's make the transition to talk about staff meetings. And just, again, we were talking earlier about, there's probably a youth minister and, of course, a senior pastor, maybe a worship pastor. And you've been at big churches and been in all kinds of different sizes. So talk to me, what does staff development and staff meetings look like? And how do you, as one of the associates there, associate minister, associate pastor, it's there, do you feel included? And maybe if I'm watching this and maybe I'm going to be a senior pastor in the future, maybe some things of, hey, think about this when you're having your staff meetings. Mm-hmm. So what is staff meetings, staff development? What does that look like in the church, in your church context?
Okay. Well, the one that I'm at right now, First Baptist, we are a small staff. So we have the youth minister, me, music pastor, congregational care, and seniors. We have 5 ministers. So whenever we meet together, I definitely feel like I'm a part of the team, which is a really big blessing to be able to speak into the church as a whole is something that I really didn't get to have at my last church, because it was such a big staff that when we all came together, there was 100 of us. We can't all speak, if there's 100 of you. So I have really enjoyed our staff meetings at First Baptist, because we meet every week on Monday morning, 10 o'clock, thank goodness, so you can sleep in after Sunday. And it's not 9 o'clock, so senior pastors remember that. But whenever we come together, we just review how was Sunday, what's coming up this Sunday, anything we should talk about. And then we go through and we just decide which minister is going to do what in the service, which is something, again, I didn't have at my last church. So we have like pastoral prayer, announcements, different things that we get to do in the service. And every week we do a different job. So we'll say, who wants to do prayer? And somebody raises their hand. And who wants to do opportunities? Which is kind of fun to get to do different things in the service. But then at Grace Bible Church, we had a children's team. So at this church, I'm the only one, but at the other church, it was, a team of people that would come together. And that was really equipping in children's ministry, because we just focused on children's and what can we do better in our ministry, which is something that I miss. So I have to look for that more now that I'm doing the children's all by myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Christy, what does it look like?
My previous church was, like I said, a lot bigger. So it was very different. I think we did the same thing. We had like children's staff. I was not the children's pastor, so we had a family pastor, and then under him we had student ministries, we had preteens, we had special needs, we had elementary, we had preschool. So we had several people. We had a weekday preschool also, where they came up under that. So we would have meetings with that group, and those are more general, philosophical, informational. There was conversations when we'd have events like VBS, things like that. We would talk through logistics of stuff like that. But in those meetings, we really didn't talk about what am I doing in elementary, because that was kind of became my own thing. So I had a team of women that worked with me that were part-time, and we would have those conversations about what is going on in elementary. So it was really a little more siloed. And so we had an all staff meeting also, which like you at Grace was, 100 people. Those were really more big picture, here's what we're going to inform you, and devotional type in the all staff meetings. It wasn't really working stuff out together kind of stuff. Different style of meeting. It was more informational and devotional. At this church, it's a smaller staff. We probably have about 30, 35. And I will say, I think this church does an amazing job of uniting their staff. Like I said, we have a corporate vision that is really embraced by every ministry. We're all officed in the same area, so we're all interacting. Like just yesterday, we had a staff fun day they do every June, and so we were all just hanging out at Top Golf, and then we went scootering, and it was just a bunch of fun. So we all have fun together. We have a friendship and a relationship. So when we have our staff meetings, they are inclusive. Like if there is stuff to talk about that you might think, oh, only the senior leadership would normally know about this, it's a conversation that we all have. We all are included. We all have input into things. If we're going to hire, we just got through hiring a worship pastor, replacing our worship pastor. There was a team of, 7 or 8 just random of us that weren't necessarily have anything to do with worship, but that were part of that interview team. So everything's done, I think, very well in unity. And so our meetings are typically more productive, I think. And then we also do staff prayer every week, which I really love, because we come together and we actually take the prayer cards from the church and we all pray together over those. And
that's neat.
Yeah, so it's really good.
That's cool.
And in my children's staff, we meet once a week, and those are more tactical. Hey, how did Sunday go? Who do we need to pray for in our ministry? What do we need to do differently this week for curriculum? The more tactical stuff for specifically.
Okay. Awesome. Just real curious with either of you, have you ever been in either church? Have you ever been a part like where the staff would all read a book together? Or, again, what is conferences, going together to a conference, as part of the development?
At Grace, we did a couple books as a whole staff, which was really cool. I enjoyed, just having something to talk about with all of our coworkers. But then we also did conferences just with children's ministry. So
Okay.
we would go to like a family conference or a children's conference.
Yeah.
At the church I'm at now, we don't do like conferences together because we're just in such different worlds. You know, there's not really one conference for a senior pastor and a children's pastor. Yeah. But they encourage us to do that. So, I mean, we're allowed to go to a conference if we want to.
Okay.
And we have budget for that, which is great. And then, yeah, I feel like they do a good job of just training us in the sense of the senior pastor always ask me into his office frequently of, hey, do you have anything to talk about? Do you want to go over anything? Which is really helpful for me.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Conferences for us at my other church, one thing we did as a pastoral staff was wasn't right now. It was the, now I just lost the name of it. I can't think of the name of the conference.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, we did a conference together that was fun. We've done several as children's teams. Other churches. This church, we went to the Children's Pastors Conference in January, and that was the first time this children's team had ever done anything like that together.
Yeah.
And so that was really great. It's great. You can learn so much and you can overconfidence yourself, but I think just the opportunity to be able to get away and be together and build unity among your team is probably the greatest benefit.
Yeah, it's the side conversation. Is just we talk about here at seminary. It's the co-curricular that happens alongside. The side conversations. They're just as good.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
And I agree. It was the same at Grace. Whenever we went to family conferences, we came back such better friends. And I think that really encourages our ministry whenever we work together well, because we have a friendship.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Well, help coach us. Let's say you've got a great idea and you want to do a new project, a new initiative. How do you pitch that to your senior pastor, to the board, to whoever it needs to be approved, to your own team? Talk to me for a few minutes about how do you pitch a new idea?
I think it depends on the bigness of the idea. So if it is something, like, hey, I want to put on a parents' night out event, I feel like I'm able and allowed to just do that myself.
Yeah.
But if it's something that's, hey, I want to change our curriculum, which I'm doing right now, I just let my senior pastor know and, ask him if he has any feedback. And if he doesn't, great. But if he wants to talk about it, we can. Just, keeping him in the loop is really helpful. Just so whenever people ask him questions, he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But then we also have a children's committee, which, me being the only minister of children at this church, the committee is really helpful for me just to be able to brainstorm and talk through. And we don't have to vote on anything. It's not like a formal, okay, we all agree. It's more of just, we're going to get together and I have questions for y'all. So I'd love to get your ideas. And most of them are parents, which really helps me know what the parents would like for me to do. Mm-hmm. And so if I have something like right now, I'm trying to name our children's ministry just to have a fun name. And so I've, sent it out to the committee on, hey, what do y'all think of all these ideas? And having their feedback is really helpful.
Yeah. Now, was that committee already in place or is that?
Okay. Yes, it was already in place, which is a really good blessing. And then, of course, if it's something big like I need a budget increase, then we have to have that approved by the church, and it goes through all of the committees like that. So really, it depends on what you're deciding.
Yeah.
But especially in the Baptist world, the committees are a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we're kind of similar. Just if it's something that's really just affects our kids' team, for the most part, I probably have the right, the ability to make those decisions. If it's something big like changing curriculum, I would probably at least inform. I'm directly report to one of our lead team pastors, so I would inform him but it would probably be, hey, let's just talk through it, make sure this is what you want to do. Not so much yes you can or no you can't, as much as have you thought through it. And if it's a big event type thing, it would go through probably him or our executive pastor, who would help think through logistics. We all have our executive pastor look over any contracts. So if we're going to hire somebody to come in, something like that, it would go through that. And our senior pastor would be included on that. If I take anything to our executive pastor or to my supervisor, they have a conversation about it on lead team. So it's pretty efficient. Things are pretty easy to get done.
Okay.
It was a little harder. Again, at the other church, it was a little more siloed because we were so big. Each ministry area was almost kind of its own little group of leadership.
Right.
If it was a big thing that would affect the whole church, that would need to go through a lead team thing. But if it was just within the context of elementary, I could pretty much do whatever.
Okay.
So.
Good. Well, I'm going to go off script for a second because it's really interesting because both of you mentioned curriculum.
Okay.
And, hey, we're changing curriculum or things like this. What do you look for in curriculum? I'm just curious. What do you look for? Because Emily, you're going through this right now of, hey, our curriculum's not working. We want to change to a new curriculum. What do both of you look for in good curriculum?
I think for me, the biggest part, especially coming out of DTS, is I just want them to know the story of the Bible, and specifically the gospel. And I think there's a lot of curriculums that touch on the gospel but don't really focus on it, especially when the kids are young. That's the most important thing I want them to walk away with is I know the gospel. And so my big thing, which I'll just tell you, we're switching to Gospel Project, because every week they tie it into the gospel. And whether you're talking about Noah or, Paul, it brings it back to Jesus. And I want them to know the story of the Bible and that it's one big God story. It's not just, hey, here's some story about Noah, let's apply it to my life, and here's some story. This is, the whole book is written and inspired by God, and I want them to have a picture of that. So whenever they're older, they won't just think, oh yeah, I've heard about that guy Adam, but I don't know where he was in the Bible. I want them to know where to find him. And so that's really what we're switching towards, is just for them to be able to have a good overview, and then also a really good, solid understanding of the gospel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Christy, what do you look for in good curriculum?
Yeah, I would say similar. For me, I can only really speak to the curriculums that I've had experience with. And when I was at the other church in the beginning, we used a curriculum that was very, very specific for each age, and it was Bible stories. It was good and it was meaty, but it was laborious, and it was different for each grade level, and there was no commonality. So when a family goes home and says, hey, what'd y'all learn about today? Every kid has something different to say.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we eventually switched to a curriculum called True Story, which is a curriculum by David C. Cook that does what you were talking about, that has the full story. It tells every year you go through the entire Bible in chronology, in the whole story through different aspects, through acts of redemption or the gospel story, or the promises and covenants. So that one was cool because every story was focused on who God is. God is strong. God loves me. God is a provider, those kind of things. So it was always focusing what was in Scripture back to God.
Right.
So that's one thing that's really important for me, is that we're looking for, we're teaching kids who God is, because ultimately they can learn all the rules, but if they don't understand who God is, someday the rules may not feel like they apply unless they actually know who this God is that they're serving. But the other side of that is it's really hard because, like, I came here and we're using a different curriculum that's a little more application based. And so trying to take that and because they had just recently switched to this curriculum. So I don't want to upset the apple cart so soon, because that's a big thing to change it on all your volunteers. And so trying to take that and do more of that with it, make more chronology based. But this curriculum that we use does have a really, really good modern media pieces that go with it. And as much as I would love to say we should be able to just sit kids down and tell them a good Bible story and they're all engaged, that's not the way the real world is. They're engaged in media 24 hours a day. So to somehow use those technology advancements to engage them in a new way, in a deeper way, is a benefit, I think, if it's not a crutch. You don't want it to be always a video story, because you don't want to have to prepare. That's not really right. You still have to include the relationships and the engagement process, and just use those kind of extra pieces. So.
Yeah. And one side thing is also the curriculum, your own volunteers grow from the curriculum.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I've always seen that every church I've been in. And so, yes, we're always thinking about the kids, but also my adults are coming saying, I didn't know that this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece and how the dots connect.
Yeah.
So yeah, or again, even the gospel message, those types of things. Well, I want to talk about you personally and how do you stay sharp. So before we hit record, Christy, you said, "Is this where I say that you take the detox after you're done with seminary?" But again, both you went through seminary, so but how do you stay sharp? And I'd love to hear from you of conferences, books, websites, the networking with other ministers, whatever the case may be. How do you personally stay sharp and vital in the midst of the busyness of life?
For me, because I'm older than Emily, and I got into ministry later in life, and I went to seminary later in life, there are things I think that help in that, just from having had children and knowing what they've experienced and being aware. So I think that leads to just really being culturally aware of what's going on and staying on top of that. And it's hard to do because stuff changes so fast. And that's really more being sharp in the sense of how do I do ministry well and how do I engage kids well. From a personal level, I think for me, I'm a relational person. So having somebody that I can talk to and bounce stuff off of. I was actually just reading something the other day that was talking about how to do quiet times and how, I need to sit alone every morning with God, and that can be frustrating for some people and it can be really easy for other people, and that there's different ways that people engage best with God. For some people it is, hey, I need a person that let's just bounce some things off together. Let's pray together. Let's talk together. Or for somebody else, it's, I need those 2 hours in the morning by myself, or that hour in the morning by myself, or I just need to go sit and listen to worship music all morning. So for me, I think it's finding that thing that allows you to really feel close to the Lord. I think you have to be careful with that you're not doing it based on emotion solely. There's got to be some foundation to what you're engaging yourself with, but just really finding the best way to refresh and make sure that you are taking time out. It's one thing I've appreciated about this church is that they really offer that time for refreshment. They're like, hey, look, if you need a 2-hour or a 4-hour, a half-day retreat just to get away and just, refresh your soul, go for it, So I think having the opportunity to do that, because everything that we do, and I think this is really important for anybody doing ministry, and I've learned the hard way, everything we do for the church and for the Lord is good or can be good. And there's a lot of things that come at us that are good that we have to say no to, or we'll burn out. And I think that is a big part of it, is being aware of where your boundaries are, and where are you going to hit burnout, because you don't want to, because then you're no good to anybody for any of it. Don't stick within that guideline. So
okay. Emily, how about you? How do you stay sharp?
So I related to Christy whenever she talked about her 24-month sabbatical after seminary. Because coming out of seminary, you were like, I will never read a book again. Done. And I think that's normal. I don't know if I want to say that's good, but it's normal. So I think it's okay to take some time. But then I just realized, even a couple months into that sabbatical, that, gosh, I was craving the word. And I think the Holy Spirit will just tell you if you haven't been in the Word, because you just start craving it. I mean, you go from, honestly, a seminary high of reading the Bible so much, and then if you stop, all of a sudden, you can tell. And so I had to get back in, and honestly, it's hard to get back into the routine, because you're like, no, I don't want to read the Bible a million times anymore. But when you do, you could just see how beneficial, and just how my spirit was so much more at peace. And so getting back into that routine of reading the Word every morning is really important after seminary. And then, like she said, having somebody to talk to is super important. I mean, if we silo ourselves, that's where we do get burned out, because it's hard for us to see that we're doing too much or that we're doing too little when it's only us And so even if you're at a small church like me, you have to have community, somebody to be able to talk to.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that has been really a big blessing is me just listening to the sermon on Sunday, and just being a member of the church that is willing to listen to my pastor and grow from that. Because I came from a church where I didn't get to go to the service all the time, because sometimes I had to be with the kids for both services. And so seeing how I have been able to listen to the sermon every Sunday, I think I've grown a lot just from that. And so making sure that that's a priority for you, that even if you can't do it on a Sunday morning, like listen to it, online or sometime, because it's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, good.
And that's a huge thing, especially for children's ministries. If you have programs, even if you have two services, but you typically have children's programs during both.
Right.
For children's ministry leadership, it's a very common that you don't ever get in there. And so you have to kind of carve that time out to.
Yeah. I agree. Any on the professional side, any recommendations of, hey, this is a great this is a website I go to, or man, you know what, this conference, there's a ton of conferences, but man, this conference is really good, or whatever the case may be. Any suggestions that you have of professional development?
Well, like Christy said, Children's Pastors Conference is amazing. I've been before as well, and my dad was a children's pastor all through my childhood, and he went every year just because it was a good way for you to get away, but then also just to open your eyes to, hey, is there anything new that I need to be doing? Or because you can get stuck in a routine really easily at a church. It's like, hey, we've done these 4 events every year, so we're just going to keep doing them. Yeah. But when you hear all of the other ideas from people and just take some time to breathe, it helps you just to be more creative. So I encourage, if you're a children's pastor, to go to that one. It's really good.
Okay. Yeah, it's really good.
Good.
The Gathering is another one that's really good. I don't know how they do it, but I've gone a couple of times, and you actually do walk away. So many times you go to conferences and you're exhausted by the time you get done, because it's like just this fire hose of information. But that one, they do really well at creating space for refreshment. So you actually walk away re-energized and you feel refreshed. And another thing for me, as this year particularly, has been reading. Just creating and setting goals for myself. That's something that they do with staff development here, is they really encourage the staff. We actually are all, I don't know if you've ever heard of Unique.
Yeah.
We actually all go through the Unique process, and kind of helps you focus yourself on who God's made you to be and how to live in that and do ministry within that. And then kind of helps you focus, like, okay, what books would be helpful for me to read, or what things would be helpful for me, conferences, whatever, to go to help me build on that. And that's, I think, a thing that's helped me a lot over the years in doing ministry better or well is understanding my identity in Christ and living in that, and not defining myself by whether or not a pastor approves of what I just did, or whether or not a parent is happy or unhappy with the way that I responded to their child, or whether that kid liked me or not. So, because it's so easy to get caught up in your identity in how things turn out.
Very true.
And when you do that, you're setting yourself up for burnout real quick, or failure, one of the two. So really, really learning who God's called you to be and who you are in Him, and really settling into that, and then doing ministry out of that makes it way better.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And another resource that I was thinking about as you were saying that was, I don't know if you're on any Facebook groups, Christy, but there's a lot of children's ministry Facebook groups out there, which are can be encouraging. Now, you have to be very aware that it can be discouraging if you see all of the things that other people are doing. You can become a little jealous. But as long as you go into it with a good heart of, hey, I just want to have some community. There's, a Facebook group for everything. So the VBS that we did, they had a ministers Facebook group, and it gave me a ton of ideas for our VBS.
Yeah.
And there's one just for my local community that we have all of us together in a group.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So it's neat just using social platforms like that to see what other people are doing and to encourage each other, and, obviously being aware that you can't do everything that everybody's doing.
Yeah.
Well, that was key for me, is just, when I was in Dallas here doing singles ministry, all of us that were doing singles ministry at all the churches, we all knew each other. We all knew each other, and we'd get together and share ideas. And, same thing when I was doing college ministry, all the college ministers, we all knew each other. And so, I got as much just from that, just the interactions. I usually tell the conferences were the excuse to get together with the people. A lot of times. Right. Well, I had this for both of you of just again and we really kind of touched on this. I mean, we've kind of went in a very spiritual development direction in that last question, but it just in general of people watching this video are seminary students. They're in the midst, and you've made it through to the other side, and so kind of parting shots of what's a recommendation that you would have to a seminary student that's going to watch this video? You can go any direction you want to go with that.
I think for me, the biggest blessing in seminary was my local church. And so if you're a seminary student and you're not involved in your local church, I think it's so important because I was blessed with a residency, obviously. And if you don't have that, you can still volunteer in a ministry and be just as involved. Because as you're learning things, you're naturally going to want to tell somebody about it. And if you're in a ministry like children's ministry where you can use what you've learned in the classroom with the kids, it's just so rewarding because it kind of lets you step back from the papers and the books and just say like, hey, this information applies to people's lives and I can see it working in the church that I'm in. I think that would be my biggest thought is just, plug into your church and volunteer, use what you're learning because it'll benefit you as much as it does to them too.
Good. Christy, you get last word.
So for me, I went into seminary, the church I was at before, I was at Stonebriar, and everybody was a DTS pastor, and I just felt kind of unequipped to do what I was doing. And I was already doing my job and I didn't have to have seminary to do my job, but I just felt like I wanted to be more equipped. So I kind of went in for the book knowledge. But in that process, I took 4.5 years to get my MACE. So I was on the slow track, but God really worked in that 4.5 years. And it was really my biggest takeaway from seminary was what God did in my life and in my heart. And I learned a lot. I don't remember everything I learned, and I never will because my brain is old and it can't hold that much information anymore. But I do remember how I could just sense those times where I listened and I was able to allow God to work and to change me, and just how He used spiritual formation, how He used professors, how He used even something I wrote in a paper or learned in a paper, but just the whole process of learning, becoming who He wanted me to be and being willing to do what He called me to do. And that was probably my biggest takeaway, and just being okay with that, not walking away thinking, well, I didn't memorize all of that, or I didn't, have the best grade on the paper or whatever. That's not what it's about. It's about really letting God work in your life and seeing what it is He's calling you to.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much. Yeah. This was fun. And again, I think everybody that's going to watch this video is going to enjoy the conversation as well. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.